Welcome back to another one of our studies in Philippians. Today we'll be looking at Philippians 4 through 6. So join me as I read. If anyone else thinks he has reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law, a Pharisee. As for zeal, persecuting the church. As for legalistic righteousness, faultless. Well, Paul is addressing the Judaizers, and we've dealt with them when we were studying Galatians. We're going to be dealing with them probably anytime we study the New Testament during the time after Christ, because essentially these were people who were saying that if you became a Christian, you had to observe all the Jewish laws and follow all the practices. Well, to the Gentiles, some of those were quite okay morally. They certainly had no problem, and we agree with that. For example, that sex only belongs inside of marriage between a man and a woman. The Gentiles may have lived otherwise, but they understood that was God's law, and certainly many other things about not stealing, about not coveting, about not lying, and that kind of thing. Those things, the moral law, they understood the need for that. But the ceremonial law was something quite different. And in Acts 16, we remember that the church met about this and said that Gentiles did not have to become circumcised, did not have to observe all of the dietary laws of the Jews. And if the Jews, chose to continue those things, that's fine. But the Gentiles were under no obligation to do so. Unfortunately, there were some people who didn't accept that. And so they went around saying to the Christians, the Gentiles, no, it's not enough that you have received Christ as your Savior. You have to do other things to be acceptable to God. And Paul argued against this time and again, time and again. And of course, he's doing this now in Philippians because obviously these folks had shown up in Philippi and were continuing this wrong teaching. And he's saying to them, because they were trying to dismiss Paul, say, what Paul's teaching wrong. And so Paul says, well, wait a minute now, guys. If you want to talk about someone who understands this, I understand this. And this is what he's going through now. And he goes through this whole process in a very wonderful and methodical argument against what the Judaizers are teaching, getting them back to the idea that we're saved by grace and we remain saved by grace. Anyway, so he says to them, if anyone has reason to be confident in the flesh, that is in the body, I have more than you guys do. I'm ahead of you by quite a bit. And he starts mentioning his pedigree. He says, I was circumcised on the 8th day, which means that his parents were devout Jews and that they followed the law to the letter. And so when he was 8 days old, he was taken to the temple. He was circumcised, marked out to be a Jew with this physical rite. And so, from the very beginning of his life and his almost his first breath, he had been obeying the law. And he says, I was of the people of Israel. Well, he's saying I was not a convert to the Jewish religion. I was born into it. I had citizenship. By everybody's standard, I had the citizenship. He said, of the tribe of Benjamin. Now we said, well, what does that matter? Well, very few Jews could track their ancestry far enough to say which tribe they actually belonged to because of all the captivity of the Jews and the being carried away and so on and so forth. And it all got all kind of confused. But his family had managed to keep their lineage straight, and he knew he was of the tribe of Benjamin. Well, Benjamin was a very important tribe. It had rebelled early on, you see this in the book of Judges very tragically. They almost were wiped out. They came back, and they were faithful to the Lord ever since that awful time in the tribe's history. You remember that Saul, the first king, was a Benjamite. He was born of the tribe of Benjamin. And that when the nation of Israel and Judah split, where Rehoboam had stayed, with Jerusalem and so on, and Jeroboam took the people and formed the nation of Israel with Judah, it was Judah and that little tribe of Benjamin who stayed faithful to the Lord. And although they messed up through the years, they had stayed quite faithful. So he said, I'm of a tribe that doesn't have to bow in shame for the way it conducted itself. He said, I'm a Hebrew of the Hebrews. Now, in these days, the Jewish people did not like to refer to themselves as Jewish, but as Hebrews. It was like a status above saying I'm a Jew, because a proselyte, that is a convert, could say that they were a Jew, but a Hebrew meant you were born Hebrew. And he said, I was in it up to my eyeballs. I was fully into what it meant to be a Jew. In fact, he said, regard to the law, I was a Pharisee. Now, the Pharisees have a kind of a bad rap. They really did have some good things about them. The name Pharisee means pure one. And they were formed between the time that the Old Testament ended and the New Testament began, during that 400-year period. And they were the ones that when the Greeks came and took over the land of Palestine, they tried to make everybody Greek. Some Jews went that way, unfortunately, and abandoned the Jewish religion. But there was a core of people who refused to bow down to the foreign invaders, refused to accept their gods, refused to accept their practices. And there was particularly a group who called themselves the Pharisees, the pure ones. And so they were zealous to keep the Lord's religion pure and themselves pure by living in that way. Now, unfortunately, by the time of Jesus, they got kind of prideful about that. They said, "Hey, we're purer than you are. We've done these things much better than the rest of you have. We are living a cut above. We are super people. You are just regular Jews," kind of thing. Well, these Pharisees, then he said, I was into this so much that it wasn't enough for me just to be following the Jewish religion with all my heart and all my soul, but I became a Pharisee. So I said, I'm kind of like the super Jew kind of thing. And so he says, here's what I am. He says, as for zeal, persecuting the church. Why? Because he thought that the church, the teaching of Jesus, was actually undermining the Jewish religion, and that it was going to ruin the Jewish religion, and that it was like a form of idolatry because it followed a person instead of, and of course they didn't accept Jesus as the Messiah. And they said, well, you're following a person, not the true God. And so his response was to join those who were going to go after these Christians, was going to wipe them out and destroy them. And you recall that that's the very thing he set himself to do, and was on his way to do it when he was on the road to Damascus, and the Lord stopped him on the way and he was converted. But, he's saying, if you want to talk about somebody who was into this, I was even going after and having people who didn't believe as we do executed, even though they were fellow Jews. He says, as far as legalistic righteousness, I was faultless. He said, anybody who knew me at that time, you ask anybody, I observed it, the letter of the law. You could not find a better Jewish man. I was the definition. I was Mr. Hebrew, if you will. I was the guy. I was the example people look to. I'm the one who mothers said to their sons, be like Saul of Tarsus. That's who you want to be like. So Paul is laying this all out. And how does that apply to us? Well, we're going to get into this more, of course, as we continue our study next week. But what it says to us is this, is that you can take pride in a lot of things. You can take pride in your tribe, in your nation. You can take pride in your looks. You can take pride in your ethnicity. You can take pride in all those things. And to a certain extent, that's okay to do that. But if you think it's going to make you righteous in God's sight, if you think God cares that whether you were born in America or Australia or in Switzerland or in Botswana or in Vietnam, God doesn't care where you were born. God doesn't care who your parents were. God doesn't care what kind of life you lived before you came to him. What matters is that even if you thought yourself to be really better than most everybody else, and in many ways you probably were, it wasn't good enough to get into heaven. And he's going to talk about that more in the next few verses that we'll study next week. But think about it. If you've been kind of resting on the accomplishments you've had, on the resume you've made, on the people who respect you and look at you and call you a really fine fellow or lady, think again, because God sees you for who you really are, but also for what you can become.